So the documentary showed us like several like strikes from like the northwest, northeast, southwest. Obviously when the documentarians were like looking for like people to interview, it was hard because most of these people had already died. It was hard to like actually like find real people as like contacts. But do we have any documentary as to what was going on in the Midwest? Was there any wobbly activity, or was there any wobbly adjacent activity that you would be able to like share with us?
Sure. So I work at the University of Iowa Labor Center as the most recent historian on something called the Iowa Labor History Oral Project, which was started back in the 1970s, actually, by the Iowa Federation of Labor, because they recognized that the people who they recognized as founding their movement back in the 1930s, by the 1970s, just like these folks, they were starting to die. And they wanted to capture exactly these same kinds of stories. So what they did was that they hired a historian like me. In fact, they had an assessment, a dues assessment on each member of the Iowa Federation of Labor of 1 cent. And they used that money to hire a historian to travel around the country to record interviews just like this. And I'm the latest of a long line of these historians. And so what that means is that we actually do have a fair amount of evidence, similar stories like this, that sort of allow us to look both backwards and forwards, right? In the sense that, again, there are little hints in this film that put it into some larger context, right? So before the Wobblies, there was something called the Knights of Labor, which was one of these early attempts in the late 19th century to organize sort of like the way the Wobblies did, which was to organize broadly. So they included skilled and unskilled. They actually included women and men, African Americans and white people. They even included and the immigrant and native born. They had their limits, right? In the 19th century, there were elements that were anti-Chinese, for example. But it was a really profound experiment in inclusive organizing. As an alternative to, again, what is hinted in the film, which is the organizing in an exclusive way, which on the one hand has some power to it, right? If you organize people who have strong internal connections, whether that's skill or whether that's race or whether that's gender, that there are tight bonds of solidarity there, but you can only organize so many of those people, and there are real consequences to exclusion, right? So again, the Wobblies are the reverse of that. What happens when we try to organize, as they said, one big union? And so again, just to answer the question, I apologize, that we see some of those stories and some of those traditions playing through into the period after this film, right? People didn't just disappear. They continued to be active in movements, into the late 19th or into the late 20th century, and they're still around in the 70s, where we see people like this being interviewed.
Thank you, and I'll continue with you then. So the strike, as empowering as it is also a very harsh process to go through. Would you like to walk us through the general timeline of the strike that happened last year? What were your demands? What were high points? What really stuck with you? And how you experienced solidarity, both within and coming from without?
Yeah, sure. To accurately describe it, we got to go back to 2015. That's when our master contract was up with our 4 ready-to-eat cereal plants. The company at that time in the union, they told us that cereal sales were down. They threatened to close a Memphis plant if we did not implement a 2-tier wage system. So that's when the 2-tier wage system was born at Kellogg's. You fast forward to 2020 in October. COVID was in full swing. So that's when our contract was up again. So we wanted to eliminate this two-tier system because Kellogg's is now making more money than they ever had. CEOs are giving themselves $2 million increases in their wage packages. So the company at that time decided we couldn't come to an agreement, so they decided to give us a 1-year extension on our 2015 contract. So fast forward to 2021 October, we still couldn't come to an agreement. The company stated at negotiations, they said we were going to absolutely not move off this two-tier system. And their proposal for the two-tier system was to make it permanent. So it's the lower tiers making about $11 less an hour, less benefits, less vacation time. And by making it permanent would mean through attrition, as the legacy employees retired or quit or got fired, nobody would move up into that spot. So eventually everybody would be on the lower tier. So that's what we were facing, and we wanted to eliminate the two-tier system. So we started here, company started there. During those 2 weeks of negotiations, they only actually met for about 10 hours. They would get out and they would walk out of the room. Like I said, they absolutely refused to negotiate that topic. And there were some other things on the table, our cost of living, which is our only source of wage increases. We wanted a bump in our pensions because everybody wants to retire, right? And so trying to secure our future there. But they wanted to take all that away at a time when the company's making record profits. We were talking about this earlier. They profited about $2 billion more in 2021, from 2020 to 2021 than they normally do. So the only thing I got asked a lot by the press, why now? Why do you think this is happening now at a time of prosperity for Kellogg's? And I think that's it. I think they were sitting on $2 billion extra. This is just me talking. Obviously I can't prove this, but I have a feeling that they said, oh, well, now's the time. Now we can afford to do this. We can afford to try to break the union right now. We're in a really good spot for that. So October 5th, no agreement came, and so we took to the streets. We had our picket duties. We picketed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We had so much support is what kept us going. People like Jeff keeping our, Jeff Shudak up there, keeping our food pantries stocked, right? We had leaders from around the country come out and support us, whether that's politicians or other union leaders. So that was the high part, was being able to see the amount of support. Just our local 50 and our donation sites and from other unions donating, we got up to about $200,000 in those 77 days. So we were able to give people a couple $100, around Thanksgiving and Christmas to help out. But that was some of the highs. The lows, we had a member commit suicide. That's one death is definitely too many. We had relationships lost, marriages. They cut off our insurance. At the John Deere strike, they were fortunate there where their insurance didn't get cut off, but ours did. We had people battling cancer, so a lot of people had to go on COBRA, which is about $3,000 a month. While you're not making a paycheck. So, but yeah, so that's it in a nutshell from start to finish. Obviously, there was 8 million balls in motion during that time, and trying to keep it all together was a project. But ultimately, I believe in what we did, especially starting off with the Wobblies there, and those people knowing what they had to do to secure their futures for their families.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Dan. It's really, inspiring, the power that you had there, but also really, always gets to us when we know that, there are major consequences to all of this, to resistance. I'll get back to you, John. Would you want to like talk about what happened to the Wobblies after like the imprisonments, the Palmer raids? Because we know that like the influence of the organization obviously like went down significantly, but these people were still alive, these people were still working, these people were still organizing. So what came afterwards?
Well, so try to pick up the thread here, which is that, so again, they didn't just disappear. And again, the problem they were trying to solve was this question of, well, if you're not a carpenter, right? If you're not a plumber and pipe fitter, if you're not an electrician, how are you going to be organized? And so they continued to face that problem in the 20s and the 30s, right? And one of the ways they solved it, or the American Federation of Labor tried to solve it, right? And the American Federation of Labor, as we talked about in the film, was really focused primarily on skilled workers. So the question being like, if you work in a Kellogg factory, what kind of worker are you? Well, to solve that problem, one first way they did it was what they called federal labor unions, which were directly affiliated with the national AFL-CIO. And actually a lot of grain millers, they get their start, a lot of locals, and I wonder if yours is too, as a federal labor union. Because again, the idea was how to solve this problem. It gets solved again in a slightly different way in the 1930s with the creation of the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, where you get the creation of things like the UAW, right? The solution there was, well, if you're an auto worker, right? If you work in an auto factory, you're an auto worker regardless of what you do. If you work in a commercial bakery, you're a bakery worker, and therefore you go into the bakery workers union. That's the solution. And so in many ways, there's actually, if you follow the line through all the different mergers, and again, the BCTGM, what is hidden there is that it's the bakery, confectionery, grain millers, and tobacco workers union, right? And his G at the end, why that's important, is that reminds you that they were grain millers first, right? Mm-hmm. So what we have here in this union, in this struggle, is a reminder of this question of solidarity and how we create it, right, on the job between different groups of workers. And so it's besides the fact that it's a real life struggle that just went on, it's this continuing struggle of how we do it, right? Like how we take us as individuals in this room and how we find these threads between us that allow us to fight in the way that they were able to fight and to win in the way that they were able to win. And that's not an easy or a natural thing to do, but there are lots of people, whether it's the people in this film or the people in your local, that are every day trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, and I'll just like take that thread and like connect it to like what's happening now with like places like the unionization of like Amazon, which is a very significant like win for the labor movement. The Starbucks Workers United, which has been going on since the 2010s, and now we're seeing like shop after shop getting like unionized. I wanted to like get your perspectives on these particular like what's happening right now and like how it connects back to these times, like the turn of the 20th century, because we hear in the documentary like Samuel Gompers, who was the founder and the longtime president of American Federation of Labor, basically describing the IWW as a radical fungus on the labor movement. So I wanted to like hear your thoughts about like how to overcome this divisiveness and what kind of like positive improvements you see with regards to the connection between the organization of like quote unquote unskilled workers and trade unions, the unions of like skilled workers.
You know, one advantage we have today, definitely that they didn't have back then, is the information age, right? Everybody's got a phone in their pocket, and most people are on some sort of social media platform. We ran a pretty good campaign when we were on strike, driving that social media, as well as the mainstream media. People, the 24-hour news cycle, people can sit in front of their TVs and watch CNN or Fox News, whatever your preference is, all night long. Well, that's I think that's what we need to do moving forward, as far as organizing other shops. other businesses. You know, we're trying to capture Rotellas. There's some other people that have reached out, and you can't substitute a phone message with a face-to-face interview. You know, but going out there, hitting the streets, talking to people, and just letting them know, you know, what we're all about as far as what it means to be in a union, right? These companies have a tremendous amount of money, and they pay a tremendous amount of money for anti-union, you know, rhetoric in their businesses. You know, they have meetings at work, and that's something that's hard to overcome for sure. One thing that we're having a hard time overcoming too, ConAgra is also in our local 50G. There's 18 different languages spoken at ConAgra, so our union membership is down there about 55%. So we're trying to start a reorganizing campaign there. It's not about going out and finding new ones. It's also about trying to keep the ones you have informed and keeping the membership up. You know, I had a new hire recently from El Salvador. Part of my job is to talk to the new hires and introduce the union, and you know, most people don't know what unions are about. Well, this guy told me, he said, if you even mention the word union in El Salvador, they'll cut your head off. And he meant literally they will cut your head off if you try to unionize in El Salvador. So that's some of the things that we have to overcome as far as education goes. What that answer looks like, if that's you know, educating young people in schools or you know, through, like I said, through social media is a good one, but you can't always believe what you read on social media either, right? We all know that. But we have Alicia Shelton is here. She's running for 2nd District Congress against Don Bacon. You know, legislation's huge. You know, we're trying to pass the PRO Act. Those are the things you know, that we're fighting on so many different fronts to maintain and grow unions in this country.
Thank you. Sean?
Well, so I'll pick up with Sam Gompers, who's an interesting and complicated and contradictory person. But you can see in his story a lot of the things we've been talking about. So Gompers was a skilled cigar roller, right? So again, like very skilled worker. He actually supported the Knights of Labor and this idea of an inclusive organizing strategy up until the Knights get suppressed. So there's I won't retell the story. We're not in Chicago, but you know, if you're in Chicago, there's this famous thing called the Haymarket affair, in which you have supporters of the Knights of Labor, sort of like what happens after World War I here, get swept up in a conspiracy trial and stamped almost out of existence. And for Gompers, and for a lot of other workers who had experimented with the Knights, sort of like with the Wobblies, the lesson was, you know, holy cow, let's not experiment. Let's go back to the old model and let's do things like wrap ourselves in the American flag. Let's find ways to not mess with the powers that be as much as we possibly can, because we have seen their power to squash us, right? And remember that basically everything in this film takes place before the National Labor Relations Act. That is the thing at the federal level for private sector workers that enabled them to become legally recognized entities, right? All of this organizing, the strength of all this organizing was, could you put enough power and pressure on your boss that you could survive when the boss got together with the city council and brought the militia in because they called up the governor and brought the troops in to crush you, right? That was the question. And so what happened with unions was there was organizing and a lot of strength, and then if they were lucky, and then an almost inevitable crash. And so the thing that really happens after the 30s, after the events of this film, is that you have the New Deal, and you have a fundamental change in American policy and labor law that allows for collective bargaining, right? This process by which it becomes a legal process, not a struggle, a sort of a bare knuckle struggle like we saw in the film, but a legal process. But again, as we saw here, right, the desire of capital to have its way does not go away, right? And so we see that continuing on even into this period where we don't see so much struggles in the street oftentimes, but we see this question of how we organize. And the thing about Amazon, the thing about Starbucks, say for example, is that we see again this experimentation, right, of trying to organize in new ways that solve the power of employers to game the system and to make it exceptionally difficult, right? They're not calling in the National Guard so much anymore, but they are using every legal tool they possibly can in order to make that system of collective bargaining as difficult as they possibly can so that they can keep as much power as they possibly can in their workplaces by keeping unions out. And so again, the struggle that they wage there at Kellogg's is a fantastic example of even when so much power is arrayed against you, that you can still, through solidarity and through a whole lot of guts and hard work, you can still win at times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on that too. You know, if it's any indication on how successful our strike was, I don't know if you saw that down in Kansas City, Cheez-Its, there is also BCTGM down there. They just ratified a contract, and you know, within their time frame, there was no threat of going on strike because Kellogg's gave them 15% raises right off the bat. So I think that's part of, you know, what we accomplished here. You know, the whole world seeing Kellogg's is a huge name, so we had an advantage, you know, but not like the coal miners against Warrior Met Coal down in Alabama. You know, that's a disadvantage for them of people not knowing who they are, but everybody knows Kellogg's. So, you know, I was getting calls from anywhere from Marion High School newspaper to Denmark, Japan, China, Sweden. I did interviews. You know, the whole world wanted to know what's going on. So I just hope that, you know, the sacrifices that we made are still helping people move forward today, and you know, unionizing at Amazon and Starbucks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The legacy will be here. Before I open it up to the floor, and I will let Jasmine take our mic. So after our last question, I would like to have our audience also participate in the discussion, and I will ask you to just wave at Jasmine if you want to say something. My last question is kind of following up on this. What should we be vigilant about with regards to potential new attacks on labor? What should we be prepared against, in your opinion? And what can we hope for? What can we look forward to? Where do you see the momentum, the current momentum, leading to?
You want to go?
Yeah. Well, obviously, you know, as far as to what to look out for, I'm going to have to think about that one for a second. But you know, the way I see it going is, you know, more success. The more people band together, and we use that word solidarity freely because it's what it is. You know, if people stick together, it doesn't matter who you're fighting. You know, like the lady said at the very end of the film, without labor, you got nothing. So, yeah. But what to watch out for? You know, they're gonna deploy the same tactics that we are. They're gonna take to social media. You know, during our strike, they jumped on our Instagram and our Twitter hashtags. So if you typed in a hashtag, you know, you're looking for news or whatever it is during our strike, the company jumped on those and, you know, and put out their own messages. So it's definitely a constant battle. You know, the the thing that I want to iterate the most is let's say Jeff Bezos, for example, on Amazon, right? If all the warehouses unionize and these people are making a livable wage finally, and they don't have to work another job or work 16 hours a day to make ends meet, that doesn't mean your Amazon package is going to cost more. What that should mean is Jeff Bezos doesn't get his spaceship for the year, right?
Yeah, well, so, yeah, I would just reiterate that and say, there are real, there was a time, again, in the mid 20th century where labor was quite strong, certainly compared today or to the period in this film, right? In the period between about 1935 and about 1970. And for all the limits and the flaws of that period of labor power, it was a time when working people had, compared to today, or from the early 20th century, had real meaningful say in their workplaces, right? In this place where they spend a tremendous amount of their lives, and that made an enormous difference in the lives of people of that generation. And it can be difficult for us to remember now because I was born in 1975, so my whole life has been spent in this period of comparative labor weakness, and I think that if we really, especially this newest generation, right? This is the reason that you're seeing organizing at places like Starbucks. They have known recession after recession. They've known economic collapse after economic collapse. They have known the inability to have power in their workplaces. They've known the inability to save and to buy homes. The sort of deal that we tend to think about with, say, the 1950s and 1960s, that was undergirded by labor strength. That was the labor movement, bringing wealth and power into workers' pockets for all of its flaws, right? It was also, they struggled, as you see in the film here, right, with questions about how do you really bring in women, African Americans. It was not a time of solving these problems of solidarity, but we saw in that moment what it meant to have real working class power in many ways. And I would submit that what we need a lot of right now is more of that.
Thank you. So the floor is open. Oh, it's better for everyone if we use mics, if that's okay with you.
Is the IWW still in existence today?
Yeah, right, it is. It has a website, in fact. It has a website. You can buy T-shirts, totes. So I mean, and in fact, it's continuing to organize, and it's organizing in places like, a lot of the service sector work. And they've started even adopting, as I understand it, collective bargaining agreements, which used to be their hallmark, which that they didn't want a contract. And the reason they didn't want a contract was that contracts are both good and bad, right? Because the contract binds you, the workers, as well as the boss, theoretically, under collective bargaining. And they didn't want to bind themselves. They wanted to be able to say, if we got a problem at work, we're going to strike right now. Right, we're not, and we're not going to, again, sort of bind ourselves. They've changed their ideas about that because of some of the advantages of collective bargaining, if you can get it. But yeah, it still exists.
Over here, we also have.
Hi, thanks. So this is May Day, which is Labor Day around the rest of the world, and one of the things that jumps out to me from the film is the way the Wobblies framed capitalism as a system of inherent antagonism, right? The only way to overcome the antagonism between workers and capitalists is to move to another system. And some of those same folks, I think, were part of the CIO, and you had then, if you could talk more about this history of sort of how that left vision got purged from the U.S. labor movement, and I think part of that ends up with the U.S. labor movement's relationship to labor movements in places like El Salvador. But today, young people according to polling, have, half or a small majority unfavorable opinions of capitalism. So where does that stand today in terms of labor in the U.S. and around the world, and a vision or horizon beyond capitalism in these struggles?
Yeah, and again, it's a complicated and long story, and it's kind of hinted at here. So again, and I'll try to make this really quick. I mean, as we saw, right, with the Bolshevik Revolution, there's this crisis that happens within the left. This question of, well, the Bolsheviks in the Russian Empire seem to have figured it out, right? But what it actually does is it creates a sort of civil war within the left. This question of what comes next, what particular, if there's going to be an alternative to capitalism, exactly what is that going to be? And that's had been this long and continues to be this long conversation on the left. Is it going to, does it ultimately, is it going to look like what happens in the Soviet Union or any other national context, or have we never figured it out yet, right? And what this does is it wraps up the question of the labor movement and of labor power in the question of the Cold War. And I think maybe what you're getting at is that after World War II, there's this moment where it's possible that the U.S. could have moved in a more social democratic direction. But in the late 1940s, there's a whole series of strikes involving some of the folks who would have probably been part of this movement, who had gone into the CIO in the 30s. Which was again one of these experiments in organizing industrially, and it includes in the 30s communists and socialists and anarchists and syndicalists. But after World War II, the Cold War context leads parts of the labor movement, including the CIO, the UAW most infamously, to purge and throw out members of those movements. In fact, the first union I was a member of was the United Electrical Workers, and they, if you ask the UE, they left the CIO. They did not get thrown out, but according to the CIO, they got thrown out, and the reason is that they refused to purge communist members. So that tradition continues in the sense that in the UE, what we would say is that we preserved rank and file democracy, but there's a whole lot of traditions. So I would say that the traditions actually don't disappear. It's just a question of where you find them.
No, not to that. I'm glad the good doctor's here, because I'm sorry, man, I don't know.
All right, so how do you fight the anti-union rhetoric? Because recently, or a couple months ago, actually, we were having a discussion over labor unions in my public administration class, and somebody who I assume has never worked a wage job in their life, because from the way they argued it, they can't, because one girl who works at like a scooters, they were talking about starting a union, and this person got very upset with that and said, if you want to raise, go to your boss and say, I want to raise. Don't involve everyone else in it. And I was genuinely confused at the thought of, well, what if they just fire? Like, you want to raise? Or go work somewhere else. We're not gonna, like. But if I pointed that out, like, okay, if you stick together, you're more likely to all get a raise. And I don't understand where their idea of how power dynamics work. Right? If you fire everybody who works at the scooters, all right, you're out of business, all right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you stick together, and if you all walk out together, then nobody's getting their coffee at Scooters for that month, right? They're gonna have to take those losses. Unfortunately, they'll be able to backfill, which they did try to backfill us at Kellogg's as well. But it takes time for training to put some perspective on it. The scabs, I'll call them scabs, are telling us at work we can't use that word, but I don't know what other word to use. the temporary workers that they brought in to replace us while we were on strike. They had a big award for them. They gave them an award for running 15 million pounds of product. This was after 2 months of strike. Well, we came back in after strike. We ran 15 million pounds in a week. We know what we're doing. And as far as everybody staying together, everybody who knows something goes out at once. Who's going to train all these people when they come back in, right? And if it's just not one scooters, and if you can get the other scooters, all the scooters around town eventually, then boom. We had the Great Resignation. What was that? 2020, where 4 million Americans quit their jobs. It's not so easy just to replace people. Kellogg's went down to Texas and Georgia to strike busting companies, and they brought people up that way. There's not that many people to fill the job, so we have an advantage, especially right now in history. We have a huge advantage that they can't just replace you. We are not so easily replaceable, no matter what your skill level is. I mean, obviously, the higher your skill level, the harder you are to replace, but even just general labor, it's not that easy. And as far as the anti-rhetoric goes, union rhetoric in workplaces, we got to pass legislation. We got to make some of those things that they're doing illegal. If forcing it on you in a workplace, we got to make that illegal. But what we do is we see it for what it is, and like I said, we take to social media and we get on there and we have our own. We like to believe ours is the truth of it, not just propaganda, to keep these CEOs' bank accounts inflated.
Yeah, I don't. Like I say, I'm a historian, and I'm a union member, but I'm not in the trenches like this. But what I would say is it's just important to realize just how many cards the employer still has, and how much cultural weight there is to it. And thankfully, we're in this moment where again, like the failures of our system to deliver for younger workers in particular is starting to throw all of that into doubt for so many workers, right? And it's also, it's creating this historical circumstance where some of their old levers of power, I desperately need this job, so I'm going to do whatever I do so that I don't lose it. I'm certainly not going to risk unionizing. And just as a PSA, it's absolutely illegal for your boss to fire you while you are organizing. They will do it, and because the reason they will do it is that they do not suffer tremendous legal repercussions. So they will absolutely break the law, and they do it with impunity, virtually, every month of the year, someplace. Not because, because they can. And so if we can change the legal system in ways that make that really painful for them, they'll stop doing it. And if they stop doing it, then it will be much easier for people to make the decision, which should be theirs, right, to decide to join a union or not to join a union. So again, it's about culture and power and solidarity.
Thank you. I don't know if there's any more questions, but we are actually a little bit out of time. Maybe a short question before we conclude. Very short question.
Very short question. Can you just explain where the term scab came from?
I actually don't know. I don't know where it comes from.
I don't either. That was a short question.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I will have to wrap this up, but please join us in the lobby. I'm sure that our speakers would like to answer a couple more questions if they have time. But thank you all for coming and in solidarity. Thank you.